Okay, let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome all of you in today's Digital Readiness webinar. So to those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to briefly introduce to you our company, Assessment Analytics, or AAI. Our vision is to be the top-of-mind partner of organizations when it comes to their talent management solutions. And our mission is to be able to empower individuals like you, as well as organizations, in fulfilling their own purpose so that they can realize their full potential and enable them to achieve the purpose. And this is something that we can do through our products and services. And we are proud to be the authorized distributor of talent measurement solutions in the Philippines. So to show you briefly our solutions, online assessment solutions, as well as our products, as well as our services. We have several solutions for recruitment or talent assessment, as well as talent development. And we also have various services or training programs that we offer our partners or our clients. And this training program is just one of them. Let's just go through a few house rules before we start the session. You are all, at first, this session is recorded and we have all muted you just so we can avoid unnecessary noise. But this should not stop you from participating. At the lower portion of your screen would be the chat box, which you can use to type in your questions, which our guest speaker will answer later on. And this afternoon, we are happy that we are happy and honored that we have with us today our partners from SHL. And to welcome us all and formally introduce our guest speaker, we have with us the head of distributors of SHL. She is a business psychologist who has worked at SHL for the past 17 years. She's also a professional services consultant. And although she is based in the UK, she has visited the Philippines both during her vacation as well as on official business, which just shows that the Philippines will always have a special spot in her heart. So ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Ms. Samya Khan.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you. And thank you, Carol. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. I'm pleased to be introducing Brandon Pleaner, who is the SHL Global Talent Management Solutions leader. He has worked in several roles across SHL, including consultant, solutions architect, and management for 11 years. He has a wealth of experience in the talent management solutions lifecycle and has worked with several clients across industries from Africa to the Middle East. He's also been a brilliant source of support for our distributors, such as Assessment Analytics, And as well as I am confident today that he will provide a very insightful presentation. Brandon, welcome, and over to you.
I need to unmute myself. That always helps. So thank you so much, Marion. And yes, thank you so much for the introduction, and really excited to be joining the team today and to take you through what we're seeing when it comes to the world of digital. As Carol indicated up front, do please share any questions that you might have in the chat, and I will try and answer those questions either as I'm going along, or alternatively, I'll make sure that there's some time set aside at the end to answer any questions that I don't get to, or alternatively, if there are any questions that people might have towards the end. So yes, let's keep the session interactive. Do share your comments, do share your questions, and as indicated, I'll pick those up as we proceed. So just wanting to double check, always good to do so. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen, and if not, somebody can let me know. but I'm going to work on the assumption that that can be seen. So yes, let's start with a quick video, if we may.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. Mm-hmm. Sure, what time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now. Okay, we have a 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's her first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
So that's a video that many of you may have seen previously. And for those who haven't, what you've just witnessed there is an artificial intelligence bot making a hair appointment on behalf of an individual. And what that really showcased is a couple of things. The first is how we've moved quite far when it comes to natural language and using natural language processing, both in the process of speaking as well as speech recognition. And we've started to infuse artificial intelligence with human qualities, things like going, the kind of inflections that we do as human beings when we have conversations. So it's a demonstration, and that's the Google Assistant that's doing that booking there. It's really speaking to not only how far we've come in terms of technology and the digital, but the speed and the naturalness with which we're moving in relation to digital. And that really is the conversation that I'm going to be having with you today. And it's about firstly understanding what this digital world means. Secondly, to sort of think about what does the digital world mean in relation to working environments, and particularly coming out of the pandemic, where we're starting to see countries at different paces grappling with questions of, do we take everyone back to the office? Do we focus on a hybrid work model? Or is there something else that we can achieve which sits in between those, as an example? I'll then spend a little bit of time talking about the competencies that we've identified as being really critical and essential in supporting that hybrid working process and this digital world that we're moving towards. And then I'll end the presentation this morning just with some simple key tips and things to think about in terms of actions that you can take with regards to your own digital workforces. So that's the journey that we'll be going on this morning. But I want to start with a quick question, and people can answer this question in the chat. So very quickly in the chat, if you can respond for me, how is digital changing your world on a day-to-day basis? So what does digital mean for you? How are you seeing digital transform what you're doing on a day-to-day basis? So if I could ask people just to respond in the chat. So there's some coming in. Yep, learning is more accessible. That's such an important one. I did a session yesterday with a big banking client across Asia and the Far East, where we were looking at development and the digitalization and what I term the democratization of learning, which was interesting. What other thoughts do people have? So we've got the one there from Jambi, thank you, from Edgar. Yeah, borderless, the world is borderless. Working from home, wider reach for connectivity, knowledge sharing, definitely creating these sort of communities, efficiency and scalability. Yeah, not only banking transitions, but there's a lot that's always on all the time, so we can access, we're in an always on world at the moment, automated processes, a lot of things that we can do, without leaving our home, from, the very simple to some really complex things that we can do. And yeah, a lot of automation of manual processes, product innovation, wider connections, faster communications, absolutely. So all of these things are and certainly do keep them coming in. And these are just a smattering of where we're seeing digital playing out. We're seeing it change the labor market. So that's the one thing that, and Cecilia, I think your timing is perfect, unlimited potential, is that by the digital has made labor markets more accessible. No longer am I required to necessarily have a person in a seat and in a role that's in my country. They may very well be in a totally different country. And I'm, as introduced, I'm sitting and while Samir is in the UK, I'm sitting in South Africa, and I'm having this conversation with a team that's spread all over the world. It's increasing the space of the pace of business for sure. The clock speed of organizations is accelerating. Automation is huge. I'm very interested in AI, particularly when it comes to psychology. So my background's also in psychology, and I'm very interested in how we're starting to see automated, auto intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing playing out in the psychology space. But yes, it's driving innovation, it's shifting markets and regulatory, the Internet of Things. Every single one of us, I'm sitting here, I've got 2 mobile phones, I've got a watch on that's tracking my heart rate and all sorts of other interesting things that are going on, that are leading to many of those digital changes that people have indicated in their chats. But let's begin the conversation by understanding what digital means as a start. And digital is at the moment tied up with the idea of industrial revolutions. And the industrial revolution started out many years ago with mechanization, steam power, water power as being one of the most significant shifts in how we began to do work and how we began to deliver work and how we began to deliver value. And that shifted through mass production, the work of Ford and the Fordian philosophies around assembly lines, and that was supported by the advent of electricity for all, into the third industrial revolution around computers and automations, and where we find ourselves today with cyber physical systems. What is a cyber physical system? That's really where we're seeing the rise of machine learning, artificial intelligence, where the physical system, and I'll talk a little bit about the next evolution of where we think we're going in terms of digitalization. But what's really important is that there's a lot of pressure on organizations to make or to move towards the fourth industrial revolution. But you have to start by understanding, where is your organization? So some organizations, depending on what you're doing, don't necessarily have to be in the fourth industrial revolution. It's okay for them to still be working with computers and automations. It's okay for some, if you're in a heavy industry, for example. Yes, there's some computers, and yes, there's some cyber physical. But the bulk of what you're doing as an organization digitally is probably still around mass production. So it's still sitting in the second industrial revolution. And that's an example where within an organization, you can be in 3 of these different revolutions simultaneously. I might have a floor, which is using mass production and assembly line philosophies. So that's in the second industrial revolution. I'm using computers to control a part of that floor, which is in the third industrial revolution. And I'm dabbling with automated intelligence and artificial intelligence in order to do predictive ordering of tools and parts that I might need on my floor. So I'm starting to bring in the fourth industrial revolution. So it's really important as a starting point to understand what digital means for your organization, because depending on what it means for your organization will influence the type of digital competencies that you need for success. But we also need to be thinking about the future and where we're going. So yes, we're in the fourth industrial revolution at the moment. But if you go online, you can start finding information already about the fifth industrial revolution. And that's a space I'm especially interested in. The concept and the idea of the man-machine centaur, where we bring together the best of people together with what artificial intelligence and machines do really well, and how we combine them in symbiotic relationships. But there's also talk already of the sixth industrial revolution, nanotechnology, biotechnology, quantum and quantum physics, and quantum mechanics and quantum computing and the like. And there will be future revolutions as well. But the underlying message is understanding what each of these means for your organization, because that drives the type of competence and skills that you require in your business. How big and how important is digitalization? Well, we know, and this is research that was done 2019, 2018, that most organizations, nearly 90% of business executives, have indicated that digitalization is a priority for their organization. Most HR leaders are also telling us that there's no doubt that the digital will impact current and future roles. Will artificial intelligence replace all of us? No. Will it replace certain roles? Absolutely. Will it give rise to new roles? Absolutely. And I think it's about managing some of that context around the digital world, that it's not all, because at the moment, digitalization almost has something of a bad reputation in that, well, the machines are going to take over. Well, they're going to take over certain tasks. They're very good at repetitive tasks. They're really good at basic analytics. They're really good at search tasks if you're trying to process enormous amounts of information. But they're not good at empathy, and they're not good at creativity. They're not good at innovation, but they contribute in those spaces. So in 2019, so this is just before the pandemic, about $1.7 trillion was spent by organizations on digital transformation. What's interesting is that in amongst all of that spend, not all organizations are seeing the success of a digital transformation. About half of them have said that they went on a digital journey, but it hasn't necessarily transformed their business. 16% indicated they had mixed results, and only about a third indicated that there were clear successes. And what's really important to keep in mind there is that's partly driven by, and this is slightly older research, 2016, 2017, thereabout. But the point is to understand, what does digital mean for your organization? What do you need the digital world to do for you as an organization? So with that in mind, again, I'm going to go to quick question back into the chat box, please. But for you, so you've all told me, what's digital in your world, but what defines a digital world? What makes the world digital? Interested to hear some people's thoughts, and hear your thoughts in the chat box. Just pop in there. What defines a digital world for you? What makes the world digital? So we've seen how you have, how you're experiencing the digital speed and so on and so forth. But what's the definers of a digital world? If you could just pop that in the chat box for me, please. Yeah, access. Yeah, that's a great one, Edgar. Here's a good example of it. We're having a virtual session, and so that gives people access. So there's the virtual which comes through there. What else defines the digital for you as organizations? There's a degree of technology. That's an interesting one, and I'm going to speak to that one in a moment. Digital literacy. Absolutely, that's so important. We're seeing more and more organizations talk about the need for digital literacy. Convenience coming through, certainly all of them. Paperless, if that was the case, it sort of feels for me, and I don't know how other people feel, we talk about a paperless world. I seem to be filling in more and more forms nowadays and signing more and more forms. And you would think we could do it digitally, but some people, we just have a desire to hold on to paper. E-Connect, safety and security, that's central. I think you can't turn on the news nowadays without seeing some form of reporting around data breaches and ransomware and so on and so forth. So it's so important to manage the security of information, like digital currencies, Bitcoin, some really interesting work around Bitcoin's interesting. It's really interesting, some of the applications we're seeing of blockchain technology, which underlies digital and which underlies your digital currencies. And not for this session, but off the back of the session yesterday, one of the things that we were talking about was, can you use blockchain as a means of validating people's experiences and qualifications and the like. So yes, thank you so much for sharing many of the thoughts coming through there. Fundamentally, it comes down to four elements, that digital environments are defined by these four components. Firstly, we see a high rate of change. They accelerate change. The clock speed of organizations, the speed with which, and for most of us, I mean, the phones that we have today compared to the phones that we had 2 years ago, compared to the phones that we had 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And I think we all have memories of a Nokia 3310 as being our first phone. And how fast and how far we've come in relation to that. So there's this high rate of change. And that brings about a high degree of business transformation, is that our businesses have had to evolve in some form or guise in order to keep pace with that change, or in some instances as drivers of that high rate of change. They are technology intensive. Somebody did put in the chat here that there is a technology element to it. And yes, there definitely is. They are technologically intensive, but we have to be critically clear on keeping separate digital competencies, which are the behaviors, from technology. The behaviors allow me to interact with the technology in many instances, to leverage the technology, to get the best out of the technology. But technology is not the competence. That's the enabler. That's the tool. It's the digital competence that allows me to interact with the technology that's so important in this instance. Because yes, the digital is technologically intensive. We are surrounded by technology. As I said earlier, I'm sitting here beyond the wearable device I was talking about. I've got 2 mobile devices. I've got 3 different screens that I've got. I've got 2 separate computers. I've got a modem, and that's within a 1 meter squared sort of space. I've got a games console that sits underneath the table as well for those moments where I need to unwind a little bit. And then the third is that the fourth and final component that defines a digital environment is this massive focus on innovation. So those are what we've seen and found to be the 4 key characteristics of a digital environment. What does that mean, though, for organizations, and especially for organizations as we navigate our way through the pandemic and certainly post the pandemic? So we know that there will be a different state that the world will find themselves in. And each country is finding itself in a different state as they navigate through the pandemic. And this will get to the point where we will overcome and bring the pandemic under control for a period of time. And history is peppered with cyclical processes around pandemics and the like. But what does those 4 digital elements mean for organizations? So when it comes to change, is that you have to revisit, and it's important for organizations when it comes to the digital, to revisit their strategies and their offerings. What are you doing? But equally, what are your suppliers and your competitors doing? The digital world has transformed the supply chain in crazy ways. From using, we talked about, I mentioned blockchain earlier. We're seeing organizations using blockchain to trace and track from cradle to grave when it comes to the supply of and to their supply chain. So they can track anything from origin to end by using blockchain to validate its veracity and that it's not coming from a gray market or a black market and the like. But it also allows you to, it requires you to keep track, and competitors are changing so quickly. So you have to revisit on an ongoing basis. I think most of us know this. Gone are the days where an organization would do a 10-year strategy or a 15-year strategy. Most organizations that I'm interacting with aren't doing 5-year strategies. They're doing 1-year strategies. And within that strategy, they've got multiple touch points where they revisit and revise to respond quickly to what the market is doing. The second element is that there's this, as indicated, there's an intensive use of technology. And technology does allow for enhancements. It does allow for new developments which open up market opportunities, whether that's new geographies, whether it's verticals or horizontals within your own business. It's how do you leverage the technology to be able to make use of these new market opportunities. It also creates new business models, and it's important for us to look at our own business models as well as possibilities that business models provide, because it does define and redefine how our business creates, or how a business creates and captures value in the market. And SHL is a really interesting case study for this. Is that, so when I joined SHL many years ago, so I've had two stints within SHL. When I first joined SHL in 2007, our core business was paper and pencil assessments. We would go out to a client, you would have a room full of individuals, you would hand out the assessments, and people pencils and people would complete all the assessments, you'd collect them back in, you would either hand score them or you might put them through a scanner with a very clunky sort of scoring system that sits in the back end, compared to where we are today, where we have transformed into a fundamentally data analytics organization. We sit on 45 billion data points that we've collected over time. And it's how do we leverage those data points by using the technology that's available to begin to assist our clients in making critical business decisions in relation to their talent. So the technology has redefined the business and the opportunities in the market that we've been able to shift into. And then finally, the other element of digital is that it allows for new ideas. It allows for experimentation. It allows people to experiment quickly and fail quickly as well. And so making use of innovation to improve processes and products as an ongoing imperative. And back to the industrial revolutions we talked about, it's really about understanding where you are as an organization in relation to any one of those revolutions. And importantly, what do you need to be successful as a business? So I'm going to take a moment to pause here and just see if there are any questions before we move on to the next poll. Any questions that people might have, feel free to put them into the chat. Or if you have something that you're really keen to ask, feel free to come off mute and ask. And if not, I'm going to move on to, or we can do it at the same time, is let's kick off the poll. So we've got a quick poll for people, which will hopefully get launched in a moment or so. And while that is being, there we go. So that's the poll. But if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat now. So the poll is, where do you think your organization is in relation to remote working? That you're all back in the office, some are back in the office, some are at home, some are rotating through the office, all of you are still working at home. Some of you are totally confused. We don't really have an approach, and others have a very, very clear hybrid model. Awesome. I'm so glad that somebody was brave enough to go, oh, we don't know. We really don't have an approach at this point in time, because my general experience is most organizations are still struggling with that. So small percentage. So nearly half of you have voted. Half of you have voted now. This is amazing. It's so cool to see the answers coming in. Brilliant. Brilliant. Let's give it another 30 seconds or so for people to respond. So far, 6% of you fully back in the office. Most of you, nearly just over half of you. Some are back in the office. Some of you at home. 56% of you in that half type of model. 13% of you rotating through the office at the moment. 25% still fully at home. 2%, one person brave enough to go, we have no idea, totally confused. We're sort of figuring it out as we go along. And 2 of the responses from 54 people, so 4% indicating that they have a clear hybrid model. So really, really interesting. And thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing when it comes to hybrid models and how to think about and some of the considerations that needs to factor in when it comes to hybrid models, because there's a link obviously between hybrid working models or remote working models and digital competencies, which we'll get to in a moment. So thank you so much for everyone for sharing that. And we need to start by understanding the kind of journey that we're on when it comes to remote working and digitalization. So quick orientation to what you're seeing there is on the vertical axis is the level of productivity, and across the bottom is time. So we know that when the pandemic first hit, organizations went into this first phase of adjustment. We went into a crisis management phase. We were trying to figure out where to put people. We were making sure that people had the equipment that they needed. We needed to evaluate the risks with remote working and so on and so forth. And we had to adjust very, very quickly. Now, similar to the 4 industrial revolutions, most organizations are probably in these 4 phases all the time. There are instances where you then have to go, okay, well, there is some crisis management I need to do. I need to be getting new equipment out to teams. Others are in phase 2. They're in this virtual world. They're supporting. They're able to manage the change. They've kind of created a new normalcy for themselves, and that there are then new opportunities for social contracts, collaboration, and the like. As we move through to phase 3, where we start seeing increased productivity and engagement over longer periods of time, with organizations now starting to identify the opportunities that come with hybrid working. And those are as simple as real estate. We spend an enormous amount annually as organizations on the physical offices that we either own or that we rent. And we've seen a lot of organizations moving to smaller office spaces. So they're keeping an office space, but they're not necessarily moving to an office, to a full work from home approach. But what are the sort of things that one has to think about when it comes to remote working and the hybrid working model that will ultimately lead to the kind of competencies that we're looking for? So you need to start thinking about, okay, well, what are the functional responsibilities? And these are the considerations that will determine what type of hybrid model you might go with. How do we work? What are the ways in which we work or could work? So what's the type of work we perform? What are the skills and the preferences that people need or have? What are the kind of functional responsibilities? What are our typical employee practices? Do we have policies and practices that actually allow for a digital environment and a hybrid work environment? Does our culture support it? There are certain organizations that culturally struggle with the transition to remote working. Does our underlying operating model work for a hybrid world, or do we need to come up with a new model? And then how do we collaborate? How do we make use of technology? How do we make use of the communication tools? So all of these will influence really where an organization falls on the continuum of hybrid working. And what we've seen is that it is a continuum. So on the one end, we've got this sort of remote option where a lot of people will still continue to work from home, but we will maintain an office that people might come to every now and then. Or actually, in this instance, most of our staff will return to the office, but we will still have the option for people to work remotely. You've then got the sort of alternative approach, which is more hub and spoke approach. We've seen a lot of organizations go from big central head offices to smaller dispersed offices, where employees are encouraged to come and go as they wish, rather than having a strict policy. We then see, as we move along the continuum, to remote suggested, where they retain an office, but that they suggest and have most of their employees working remotely. We have thematic days, and this is also a relatively frequent one, and it aligns with, I think, the experience that many of you were talking about. It's where you divide organizations into themes that rotate through the office. So one function or team might come into the office on one day, a different function on another day, a different team on a third day, and you have this rotational process. And of course, on the other extreme end is that we have offices that are almost entirely remote, but that you repurpose your offices for only those essential tasks and roles that have to or require in-person collaboration. So this is the sort of variety of different remote working models that we're seeing. But in order to make this happen, there are a couple of things that organizations need to do. They need to think about how they share purpose. They need to rethink, revisit the purpose that they explicitly share with their employees. They need to find and articulate a new and activate a digital working culture, because it's a very different culture to a face-to-face culture. There's a necessity to be mindful of engagement and to build leadership that really drives purpose, that drives that culture that the organization is moving towards. But in order to be successful in both the digital world as well as in the remote, this hybrid working world, because that's the sense of where the world's going to go. We're going to end on some form of hybrid model, which will look different, as we saw on the previous slide, for organizations. But that means we have to rethink our structures and the roles that we have within organizations. And especially importantly is the touch points that those roles have with customers, and how do we maintain that? So we have to align around the customer experience because they're experiencing this remote world in the same way. How do I give you a great brand experience if I'm relying on you buying through a commercial platform rather than in a physical store? We need to make use of support platforms to scale and speed up our businesses, and then go beyond the idea of traditional locations and rethink the architecture of our offices. I've seen some fascinating work around the architecture and the physical space of hybrid organizations. We have to think about the ways we work. So how do we connect employees with their experiences and of being the experience of being a remote worker? But importantly, and this is where we're getting to the digital again, is we need to take the time to understand how, when, and where our employees get work done. Each of us is different. Some of us are better at 2 a.m. in the morning. And how do I create a culture that allows an employee to work at 2 a.m. and another employee to be working at 10 a.m. and another employee to be working at 3 p.m. in the afternoon? And where they work is critically important as well. So it's then building the agility around that and the normative processes that support that. It's fundamentally about how do we understand where our people are in a digital journey in order to meet them where they're at their best. And this does also require us to rethink our workspaces and the investments that we make in infrastructure, in smart workspaces, technology. The amount of digital tools that are available today are just crazy. I mean, we just did a poll. We've got 70 odd, nearly 80 odd people in a webinar being presented, across the world, being recorded, and that's just a small part of the technology that's out there. I'm fascinated by a tool that we've recently introduced into our business, and go and check it out. It's in beta at the moment, called Figma. And it's really cool because Figma allows online in real-time collaboration where people can be commenting and adding and drawing and putting in pictures and writing all in real time, and you can all see the interaction that's happening. So this is from the Boston Consulting Group in 2020, and what they've seen as important to make the world of digital work. And we're coming to going full circle, it really is that digital is at the heart of this hybrid world. And so just looking at the questions, I know, Edgar, that you've asked the question of how do we measure the readiness of our people and our organizations for the digital world. We're absolutely starting to get into that now. So hang in there and I'll get to answering that question in a second. But very quickly, before we get into the digital competencies, is that it's important to debunk a couple of myths around the digital. The first is this idea that agility is the most important attribute that we need our people to have in a digital world. And what SHL has found in our research and in interacting with clients is that actually, yes, agility is to a degree important, but what's more important is the ability to take the learning, because, and somebody mentioned it earlier, we have access to so much information. We have access to on-demand learning all the time. But how do I take that learning and apply it into my environment? That's critical when it comes to digital competence. Yes, I need you to be agile, but agile is only useful if you know how to be agile in the first instance. And secondly is, how do you take what you're learning and apply it on a day-to-day basis? It's also about agility, sure, but it's about creating relationships, because we know in a digital world that more and more you cannot get your job done without working closely with others. And that means I have to think about the relationships that I have with others, and the collaborative performance becomes more important than individual agility. The second myth is this idea that, well, do we need different kinds of leaders? And we know that that's not the case. Is that still today we need our leaders to be really good at they need to be motivated to be leaders in the first instance. They need to be engaged as leaders, and they are very specific. They still do the operational and the transformational day-to-day activities. But it is about displaying those leadership competence within a digital context. And the third one, and it was mentioned earlier as well, the point of technology, is that, lack of technical skills make candidates unemployable. And that's not the case. Nearly every job requires some form of technical skills. But if you go back to the point of application of learning and development, it's about how we create spaces for people to learn those technical skills, But the most common competencies that we still need in a digital environment are not necessarily those technical skills. So with all of this, and before I share what the digital competencies are, again, once more, very quickly into the chat, if people could just pop in the chat, what do you believe to be the critical digital competencies that will make people successful in this new technology-driven and digital world? So very quickly, pop it in the chat. What do you think are the competencies and behaviors that people will need in order to be successful in the digital world? And I've given away some of them in this previous slide, but let's see what people come up with. Learnability, yes, that ability to learn and apply is being especially important. Thirst for learning, learning coming through again. The ability to adapt quickly, absolutely. What else? Curiosity, oh, I love that. Absolutely, Mitch. The ability, that's so important to be curious. Open-mindedness, definitely as well. Willingness to learn, agility. So many of, the core ones I'm seeing there is around learning, around open-mindedness. And so this is what we found to be, before we, at the core of the four, the digital competencies, which I'll talk about in a moment, are 4 key business objectives that underpin that. We need organizations and we need people, and you've nearly all spoken to that. We need people to be continuously learning. We need continuous innovation in our organizations. The second is that we still need to deliver. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much I learn, doesn't matter how innovative my organization is. If I'm not going out there and executing, that learning falls by the wayside and it doesn't play a role. But what we're seeing as central to a digital world is data and analytics. That we are awash with data. There's so much data that is produced on a day-to-day basis. And most of us are inundated with emails, which is a data source. Most of us have multiple spreadsheets that we might work with on a day-to-day basis. But that's only the real tip of the amount of data that's available out there. Every single video that gets uploaded to YouTube is a data point, and there are multiple data points in any one of those videos. Every single chat that gets shared, every single social media post that gets shared, every single sale we make, there's so much data. And yeah, Myrna, you've popped it in the chat now. That ability to filter is so important, but it's the ability to be able to work with data and reach insightful outcomes that you can then use in that execution excellence. So these 4 work together. And of course, as I indicated earlier, increasingly with technology, we work closely together. So the importance of network performance is critical in that process. So with this in mind, the research that SHL undertook, we came out and we identified these as being the critical competencies that lead to success in a digital world. So within that domain of continuous learning and innovation, the 4 key competencies that successful digital environments have are an ability to be forward thinking. So when we say strategic thinking, is to not think about it purely as, because most of us think of strategy as business strategy, but it's fundamentally the ability to be able to understand where we are today, to identify changes that are happening in our environments, and to be able to plan accordingly. So you need to be good at strategic thinking or future thinking. You need to be creative and innovative. It is a core behavior in digital environments. It's the ability to think creatively, to think innovatively. The ability, and a couple of you did things, and Mayflaw's just put it in now, the ability to do something efficiently. And that requires actually the kind of maybe a different approach, to be innovative, to be creative. Open-mindedness is a key part of creativity and innovation, as is a key part of the third competency, which is part of continuous learning and innovation, which is learning. It's a desire for learning, a thirst for learning, a willingness to learn. And learning takes many forms and guises nowadays. It's not that historical sitting down and having a formal lecture. We have access to so much information today online. But equally, I need to be adaptable. I have to be open to trying something in a new way. So the 4 digital competencies that are essential when it comes to continuous learning and innovation: strategic thinking, creating, innovation, learning, and adaptability. But as indicating, that's all good. You need to still deliver. And that's where the execution excellence starts coming to the fore. And this is about decision making. What we're seeing is organizations wanting to push decision making lower and lower down through the structures of the business. So it's not that decisions are made in a very narrow band at the uppermost parts of the business. Organizations are pushing decision making lower, but we have to give people the skills to make those decisions. So how do I give you, and this is where it ties into insightful analytics, how do I give you the information you need in order to make those decisions? How do I know that you're confident to be able to understand all that information, to integrate it, make sense of it in relation to a business challenge to drive a decision? So yes, it's part of, it's important to push decision making down, but it's equally important to ensure that you're giving people the skills to make those decisions. Initiative. You can't sit back in a digital world. You can't sit back and wait. You have to take initiative. And other elements that are critical to execution excellence, the ability to plan and organize. So strategic thinking is seeing into the future, which is great, but I need to plan against that. So how do I organize the resources I have available, plan around those to deliver successfully? And of course, you need to focus on the customer. I mentioned that earlier, meeting customers where they're at, because the customer experience is so different today. So in order to execute effectively, those 4 competencies are important. Decision-making, initiative, planning and organizing, delivering results. Network performance is so important. It's working collaboratively. And that's driven by 4 underlying competencies. Building relationships. How do I create networks of relationships in an organization and outside of my organization? But the network's great, but how do I influence that network? How do I get others to, how do I co-opt and bring others into a project in order to be successful? How do I influence them? How do I motivate? How do I get their commitment where they often don't? Because we also see that in organizations. Organization structures have changed. With matrix organizations, you have to influence through others. But I need to collaborate. I need to work closely with others. And central to collaboration is the ability to communicate effectively. And that is so central at the moment because we're not in the physical offices together where we can just go and have a face-to-face conversation. How do I communicate successfully via Teams? How do I successfully communicate via instant messaging or via a phone call or so many other mechanisms by which we communicate nowadays? And then the final 2 competencies, which are essential in a digital world, are a part of that insightful analytics drive. Critical thinking. Once more back to, yes, we have access to so much more information, but we have to have the ability to critically evaluate that information because much of it may not necessarily reflect the truth. It may not necessarily be accurate. We have to bring about critical thinking in our organizations and the ability to then apply and make use of technology. So these are the 14 key digital competencies that we've identified as being critical to be successful in this hybrid working world that we're moving towards. Ability to think into the future, be creative, learn, adapt, but make decisions and initiate action, plan and organize around that to deliver results, build those relationships, influence through others, collaborate and communicate, but think critically and make use of the technology that's available. How do we measure that? And that's part of the next steps with, in terms of an organization. There's really a 4-step process, if you want, to being able to transform your business towards the digital. The first is, and it goes right back to the first slide, understand your environment. Where are you in the digital world? What are your core offerings? Which of these align to your strategy? How does your business make use of technology in order to make that strategy happen? And once you understand your digital context, then you begin to understand the type of employees and leaders that you will need in order to perform that. So you have to start with understanding your business and how digital will transform your business to get an idea of the kind of digital competence that you need. And yes, all 14 of these are important. You may not have them in any one individual, But it's then about being able to say, depending on where we are in that journey, we might need to start by focusing on the strategic, on the planning and organizing, on the decision-making and the initiative, on the creating. Let's get that button down first. But as we continue down the journey, we transition more towards delivering results, towards collaborating, towards influencing, towards the use of technology. And underpinning this is learning on an ongoing basis. So once you've understood the context of your business, of the digital environment in which you're in, you can then, as indicated, start thinking about, of those competencies, which are the critical ones for us to be successful. And that could be at a business-wide level. So you might go to your organization and say, for us as an organization, where we find ourselves today, learning and collaborating and building relationships are our top 3. And you get and measure your people to get a sense of where they are in relation to those to intervene. But I can go down to a job level and go, well, Brandon, as the talent management solutions leader, you need to be good at strategic thinking. You need to be good at creating. You need to be good at decision making and initiative. And you absolutely have to influence and use the technology you've got. Doesn't take away the learning and the building relationships, which I identified as important, collaboration. But that then becomes specific at a role level. So determine those competencies at a business level, as well as at a functional or a geographical or a role level as well. Once you understand that, the next step is then to say, okay, now let's take a sense, or let's get an idea of either who we have, or when we measure staff coming in. And as an analytics and an assessment organization, those competencies that I talked about are driven by their behavioral preferences. So they're part of people's personalities and behavioral personality preferences. So you can complete an assessment such as the occupational personality questionnaire in order to generate a report which says, right, given Brandon, what are Brandon's strengths or development needs in relation to those 14 different digital competencies? And I can then bring all that data together to get an overall view of my organization, or at least know for Brandon where his strengths are and how do I use those, but give Brandon the opportunity to develop in relation to those. So it's then about, once I understand the competencies I need, assessing them, either selecting people in because I don't have that competence in my business, or accelerating development in relation to a particular digital competence because it's central to my business success. And ultimately, thinking in terms of the future, making sure that you can measure the success of those processes. So whatever you do at stage 1, be clear on how you're going to measure success, so that once you've identified the competencies, measured them, developed for them, you can ultimately also measure whether they've had an impact on your business, whichever business model you want to use there. And so this is just the same information presented slightly differently. Start by identifying your context, your digital environment. In step 2, determine the competencies that you need. Step 3, begin to identify, assess, and develop. And finally, measure and demonstrate the impact that has on your organization. So to reiterate, the digital competencies, it's these 14 competencies: strategic thinking, creative, learning, adaptability, decision-making, initiative, planning, delivering, collaborating, communicating, building relationships, influencing, critical thinking, and applying expertise. But they make sense only when you understand your digital environment and how each of those is important for any particular role. And that will help when you bring it together. So yes, you may, as you're thinking about hybrid working models, now you can start thinking, okay, well, which of these competencies would support my hybrid working model? And how do I get a measure of whether I have that in my business at any particular point in time? So with that, thank you from my side for joining me this morning on a massively whirlwind, super fast experience of the digital world. A quick meander through, start by understanding what digital means for your organization. Think about the advantages and how you can leverage the digital in your organization. What is the model, your business and working model that you're moving towards on that continuum from everybody back to the office to everyone at home, and then understand the digital competencies that you need in order to do that successfully, keeping in mind the customer experience at all times. with that, back to Carol and the team.